David Blanton of the Humble Marksman on the most exciting new guns at SHOT Show 2025 and where the industry is headed. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news reporting and analysis instead of, hot air and opinion, that sort of thing. This week, we are going to be taking a look at SHOT Show 2025. I was not able to attend this year. I was on a trip to the Philippines with my fiance, as I've talked about before on the show and in the newsletter, but that's why I want to bring in somebody who was there, who I think has quite a lot of credibility and whose videos I very much enjoy, his gun reviews I enjoy, and that's David Blanton from the Humble Marksman on YouTube. Welcome to the show, David. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here. Happy to mix it up with you, and I'll provide the hot air that you want. So here we go.
Good. We'll have a nice balance then. Tell people a little bit more about yourself and your channel for anyone who might not have heard of you.
For sure. So I run the Humble Marksman channel, which actually started life as just a place to upload match video back in the day, 10 or so years ago. YouTube was like the only free online storage place for large files. So, when we would do competition shooting, specifically pistols, USPSA and IDPA, we would upload the match footage to YouTube just, to archive it effectively because, hard drives were a lot smaller back then. And kind of as time marched on, there were only, 7 or 8 big gun channels at that point. And they started to be competition models of pistols. And the guys who were non-competitive shooters would put out videos about products saying these are great for competition. And at the time, the feature set made them basically illegal for competition. So I kind of stuck in my craw and I was like, well, I'm gonna throw my hat in the arena. I've got an iPhone and started recording terrible iPhone videos, talking about the different aspects of competitive shooting and the products that would be used in them. And as it progressed, just kind of got more into it and decided to kind of branch off into giving it a more serious run at just widening the base to not just competition specific stuff, but to just kind of general handgun, red dot stuff, and started, investing in cameras and editing computers. And now it's an actual channel that makes media. So, I'm been competing in handgun competitions for about the past 13 years. I'm a master across 5 divisions and 2 sports. So, a pretty good shooter, but focusing largely on the kind of handgun and specifically the red dot space, which at this point basically is synonymous with just handguns because they all come red dot equipped at this point, it feels like. Yeah,
the market is and the gun culture has really moved in your direction, I guess, right closer to what makes some of the advantages that competitive shooters have enjoyed for a while now. Everybody's kind of adapting some of those things for, everyday shooting and carry, especially red dots. But that's what I've really enjoyed about your channel over the years that I've been watching it, is sort of your informed approach to gun reviews that, really can tell that your expertise comes through in a lot of these reviews. And so that's, that's one of the, and also you're not part of the industry. You're not somebody who works for a gun company or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
sure.
But, you have a bit of an outsider perspective and an expert perspective, somebody who's been a competitive shooter, has a good grasp on what makes a handgun useful in competitive settings and in, defensive shooting settings as well. So, that's why I wanted to have you on. And you were just at SHOT Show. You made some interesting videos on it. And I wanted to just discuss a little bit of that, starting with just first off, I've been to SHOT Show a bunch of times now, right? It's very exciting the first couple times you go. It's in Las Vegas. They have a range day where you get to shoot a bunch of guns for free. A lot of times the companies will bring out flashy stuff to draw people to their booths, like machine guns or even mini guns or whatever. Although I have to say that has been waning a bit since the pandemic. They used to have cars with Vulcan cannons on the top of them and stuff like that, the wild stuff. And you don't get quite as much of that anymore, but you'll still get some machine guns and and suppressed full auto, and there's still fun to be had certainly at range day, but after a while it becomes, this is a trade show and it's sort of part of your job. It's sixth, seventh, eighth time you go, and one of the things you start to notice as well, I think, is trends. There's a lot of trends in the gun industry. It's a very trendy industry where everybody's sort of copying each other and trying to get in on the latest like hot thing to do. Did you notice any of that this year at SHOT Show in 2025?
This year, I would say it was the most obvious. It's been, the kind of the theme for the past couple years has been kind of the emergence of, through really good CNC machining, people discovered they could make 2011s for not as much money as they typically were trading for it, kind of that $2,000 to $3,000 price point. Now we're starting to see, with the advent of the Prodigy, drag the price way down on that. Then Live Free Armory jumps in and has like a sub $1,000 gun, and the Turkish companies jump in well under that price point. So everybody was making single action guns, and then at this point, everybody this year specifically, it felt like if they didn't have a gun with a compensator or ports, the handguns anyway, then they just painted a gun like gold, like that was it. But generally everybody had the comps and ports on the guns, and that was kind of the thing. So like what we traditionally have thought of as like a full featured firearm now has ports and comps on it, which is interesting because there is kind of the contract hard use side of the world, and then there's kind of the civilian side of the world. And I mean, they work, compensators and ports absolutely work, but they also lower kind of that operating window for when a handgun will function reliably. So, you're gaining performance, but giving up potential reliability as the gun gets dry or dirty. So this year, it definitely like everybody had compensated and ported guns, except for Staccato, and their big shtick was they reintroduced the Series 80 firing pin block and had a Glock mag in their new duty carry single action only gun. So
the Series 80, didn't everybody hate that?
Well, they figured out a good way to slick it up to where you don't notice the firing pin block on the trigger brake. You do notice it on the reset, which doesn't really matter.
I shouldn't say everybody. I have my Remington 1911 that's all painted up in the corner of the shot here is a Series 80. A lot of not in modern 1911s have that that firing pin block safety.
They're not preferred by enthusiasts, I'll say that. But at the same time, Staccato couldn't get on the list for some of the big agencies because they didn't have firing pin blocks. So now they do have firing pin blocks. That's why they take the most common magazine that you can have. So.
Okay. And so, I definitely have noticed myself the sort of race to put a compensator on everything. I mean, I carry a gun with a compensator built into the slide. The my X Macro has one, right? So I guess and that keeps your gun shooting a bit flatter is the idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the physics, if we dust off our high school physics educations, it's not just the bullet leaving the barrel, it's the bullet plus all the burned up gunpowder. And so you're able to redirect the gas up, then there's less recoil coming back directly straight back at you. So there's less energy moving the slide. And to the extent that it, forces the barrel to stay down, I'm not a fluid dynamicist, I couldn't tell you, but I do know that it affects how much is coming out of the muzzle. So the slide doesn't, come back as hard. So it doesn't bottom out on the spring as much. So it doesn't lift as much. So it's a little bit more stable.
Yeah, and you've showed that in a number of your different reviews that I've seen. I know, you'll show the videos side by side of gun with the compensator and one without one, and so there is a difference. You can practically see it. And
about 20 to 30% you can eliminate. Like in a vise, you can get up to like 40%. But a vise is not a human grip that is actually returning the gun from firing, and in the hand, I think probably the 20 to 30% is probably what you can see in a reduction of muzzle climb. And I mean, what goes up has to come down. So the amount the slide dips when the slide closes is reduced as well. So the sight picture resolves faster. That's kind of the appeal of a compensated firearm.
Yeah, makes sense. And so that was the big thing that you notice is like everybody's moving towards that.
Oh yeah.
Now it's like a standard feature more so than a
I would say the other trend is that basically used to just be ports when they would drill a hole in the top of the barrel, but the rifling continued underneath the ports. And now basically since Monsoon Tactical started, counterboring underneath the port so that the rifling stops. So now everybody's calling that a compensator as well, which isn't technical. I don't agree with that definition, but the rifling does stop underneath a very large port at the front of the gun, and that's becoming really common. That was on several different guns at the show.
Yeah. And then what were some of the guns that you were able to fire at range day or just handle on the show floor that were most interesting to you?
I wasn't able to make it out to range day. So, I've shot some of these guns prior to and since SHOT Show, but at the same time, the gun that I was most surprised by, because they did a good job of, at this day and age, if you pay attention to the internet, there are leaks basically everywhere of, somebody's getting ready to release a gun. And Canik is standing up a U.S. production factory that mirrors their Turkish factory. And the MC9 Prime, which has 3 ports, which they're calling a compensator because the rifling stops, at the top of the gun. And they're claiming that it is the least recoiling slim carry gun in the whole spectrum. So we'll be putting that to the test when that comes out in earnest later this quarter. But that was the most exciting to me, just because it's a $650 gun, comes with night sights. It's got the recoil reducing compensator. They enhanced the grip texture, borrowing from kind of the TTI Combat that they released last year. And they're putting that on the carry gun because that is a problem with the little skinny carry guns, is they usually slick them up too much. The grip stops at the mag release. And kind of the top of the grip is the most critical point in your support hand, stopping the rotation of the gun lifting. And so for a snappy slimline gun, you really do want good grip, and you want, if you can get it and not erode the performance of the gun, some kind of recoil mitigating thing is nice to have too. And this kind of checks all those boxes, and it's at a price point that is very attractive where a lot of people can reach it. So that was probably the most exciting.
Yeah, Canik has really been, I think, the most successful of those Turkish brands.
Oh, easily.
In the U.S., yeah, by far. And I imagine for a lot of American gun buyers, having them move here and make their guns in America will probably boost the reputation a little bit as well. But primarily, it's just that they make really good takeoffs of other gun designs, right? I mean, they're kind of not total knockoffs necessarily of things, but you get a lot of design cues from other gun companies like Walther in a lot of their guns.
They've also been staffing up as well. Like they've hired some product guys and engineers from other big name companies that you would recognize. So, their testing protocols and all that kind of stuff are getting a lot more airtight and like more in line with what like military contracting standards would be. And so they're not as much like an import company as they are like at this point, it's like a multinational gun company. I mean,
they've just been very impressive in my personal view as far as like they're making very affordable guns with the features that everybody wants. And especially their triggers have been really impressive, even though they seem like, you look at them and they're like, okay, that's like a takeoff of a Walther design or whatever, but they do a good job of it.
Yeah. They're excellent at it. They make great guns at this point. So.
And other than that Canik, although I will say like the Canik, the Mete was their first carry. And I thought that thing was kind of fat and heavy for,
and this one is too, because they only have one magazine design. So it's the same size magazine as their full size guns would take. So it's like a 1.5 stack. It's not like a single stack kind of design. So it is going to be on the heavier end and probably the bigger end in that segment. But at the same time, it's close enough to where, it's sub Glock 19 size, but it probably weighs about what a Glock. I don't know the specs on that particular gun, but I would imagine it's probably pretty close in weight. But it also holds 17 rounds.
Your review on that one. What were some of the other ones that you saw?
So another one I liked is the Walter PDP-F comp, PMM comp that they just came out with. It's a collaborations. That was the other big trend this year, is collaborations, and there were a few of them. So like Parker Mountain Machine is collaborating with Walter, and they're releasing a series of guns with the PMM comps installed. Obviously, Ruger and Magpul collaborated on the RXM. They don't like it when you say Rexum if you just say it phonetically. But So there were those kinds of collaborations kind of going on. And from what I'm hearing, there are more of those kinds of things in the pipeline of, Glock and the Koa from Aimpoint. Like you can't buy the sight. You can't buy, any gun that has that optic cut that's not that gun right now, at least for the first year. So there were a number of collaborations between two different companies, which is kind of cool to see. But the PDPF comp is roughly a Glock 19 size pistol. The PDPF is more mild shooting than the rest of the PDP lineup. I couldn't tell you why. That's been my experience with it. And to have a PMM comp on there, I mean, PMM has a really great compensator, so that probably is a really good gun. And Walter just puts out a really high quality product. Like when you pick up a Walter, you can tell the difference between it and its peers. Like it feels like a German gun that's, finely machined and all that. So,
and the F is the one designed for smaller hands, right?
Correct. Yeah. The grip is not as big as the standard PDP. So, I think it's great. I really like the profile. That's probably my favorite PDP is the PDPF 4-inch gun. And that's what the PDPF comp is going to be based off of. So that was kind of cool to see. I do think the Staccato P HD P4 is interesting as well, because, we probably all have law enforcement friends, and all of them I talk to independently. It's like they asked me exactly what I would want for a duty firearm and then made that gun. And, having the firing pin block is actually something that, they need, because they're, bumping and jostling guns in the holster, if they have to go hands on or something like that. So that's a desired feature. At the same time, on training days, the instructors and SWAT guys can share magazines with the general patrol cops if they have, a class with, not just the SWAT guys that are blended. So everybody can have the same mags, and they eliminate the grip safety, which, if a lot of those guys, they'll end up using like Ranger tape to tape down the safety or just pin the safety on the grip. So it eliminates a potential failure point, as well as, increases the ergonomics, because it's actually built on like 9mm architecture and not 45 architecture, because 2011 guns and 9mm are effectively 45 ACP guns that have been, had the feed ramp adjusted and the lips on the magazines tuned to accommodate 9mm. Right. So the grip is just a little bit thinner and a little bit shorter front to back, which some medium and smaller handed people don't like how they get purchased on the 2011 grip. This one fits a little better, but at the same time, I've got XL hands and my hands fit on the gun great. It's different than a 2011, but at the same time, very similar. So it's a very capable firearm.
Well, that is very interesting. We'll have to keep an eye out for some of the reviews that you get to do on these guns coming down the line. The other thing I was interested in talking about is some of the, I guess, your perspective on the industry as like maybe a bit of an outsider perspective, just in the sense that you don't work for a gun company or a gun store or whatever. You review guns. And one of the things you put out after SHOT Show on your channel was a video about Glock, right? And sort of the failure of Glock to really keep up with the rest of the industry. And I think the RXM from Ruger Magpul was one of the examples that you brought as like, you're not sure that Glock is going to be able to maintain their sort of ever present place in the market at the rate that they're going. Can you just talk a little bit about that as well? So
sure. When I say that they're going to, decline, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the Glocks are going to stop working and people are going to run out and replace them. I mean, they make a great product. I competed with Glocks for at least 5 years. They're fantastic guns. They just work. They're very simple to keep in operation, and keeping them in operation at scale, a armor with a punch can maintain a ton of firearms in not a lot of time. Even you have to do a full rebuild, it takes sub 5 minutes to do on a Glock pistol. So there's a lot of strength in the Glock design. But the industry is not what it was 30 years ago. I had a recent sit down this past summer with Ron Cohen at Sig Sauer, and he was sharing with me the numbers of their contract sales going to law enforcement agencies. And the red dot percentage, their initial projections were, by 2023, it was supposed to be, I don't remember what percentage he said, it was maybe 20 or 25%. But in 2023, over half of the guns they were selling to law enforcement agencies were red dot guns. And the problem, like, so Glock was timely in releasing the Koa because one of the big failure points of the Glock pistol has been the MOS system is it was one of the first, but it's also not a very good one. The problem that the MOS system gets into is it's a sandwich plate system where, the optic threads into the plate and the plate threads into the slide. The problems people run into with that are that the plates are sometimes warped, which leads to, extra stress on the screws. And then, the optics launch off the guns. I've got several of the MOS guns, several with high round counts. That's not been a problem for me using the MOS system. But, if you talk to enough law enforcement guys on training days, that, it's not that uncommon. So the Koa does fix that for them because it is a more bulletproof optic mounting system, and that optic seems pretty good. It's mounted really low, and I think SIG and really FN was probably the first one to really put emphasis on a really bulletproof optic mounting system. But Sig Sauer with their Romeo M17, I guess that was 2 years ago when they brought that to the market. That's probably one of the more robust optic mounting solutions. So Glock has responded to that, but the other side of that is, the shootability and usability of the gun. Glock has basically chosen the hill to die on, that their grip angle is the way that it should be done. And their grip molds have largely been the same since at least Gen 3. With the thumb scoop cutout going to the mag release, it kind of intuits the wrong way to hold the gun. Like, you want to fold your thumb down into that groove that they give you. The problem when you do that is it opens up the back of the grip tang. So when you're pulling the trigger, you're going to throw shots to the support hand side and potentially down because of that air gap. Because a lot of other firearms, when you put them in hand, it just informs how they want to be gripped based on how they're designed. Glock has never changed that design. And I've got, some instructional videos that I've done in the past where policemen will come onto the video and thank me for making the video because they were, marginal at passing qual, making, a couple tweaks to their grip. They were able to significantly increase their score. And it's because if you don't hold the gun the way the gun tells you it wants to be held, you get much better results. So from a kind of an ergonomic standpoint, the Glock is a little bit behind the curve.
And then, from like a product standpoint too, at least, just as a normal consumer on my end, it seems to me like Glock rarely introduces actually new guns. They're mostly just kind of mixing up previous configurations. Like, they'll take the frame from one numbered Glock and put it on put the slide from another one on there and call it a new gun. And it's like, I guess, but I think that's fair. It often feels like they're not really keeping up with the rest of the industry feature wise.
There's been a huge push on ergonomics and improved triggers. And that's two things that Glock is just with the Gen 5. You could say that, they're kind of a return to form. It's basically the Gen 2 grip again. But at the same time, everybody's making, guns that feel like they're designed for a human hand. And when you pick up a Glock, it just doesn't, it feels like a 1x4 strip with the edges kind of eased. It's just kind of very blocky feeling. Yeah. So,
and then something like there's this, I carry, right. And I care, as far as handguns go, more about that single stack 9mm micro, is a subcompact class, which is super popular. Right. And, it's hard for me to look at the 43 or 43X or whatever in that class and want to go for that over 5 or 6 other options that have better capacity, better features out of the box for a similar price. It's just, I don't know. It feels like Glock is kind of falling behind in that regard and sort of resting on their laurels of just being Glock. And then also there are so many Glock clones now available, including, as you mentioned, this new one from Magpul and Ruger that, are maybe looking at them on paper seem like better options than the actual Glocks they're basically copying. I mean, what is that part of why you think they may not have the same status that they do right now? going forward?
I mean, it's getting harder and harder. I mean, just going back to the feature set that we're talking on the pistols, like take the Canik MC9 Prime that we were talking about, a $650 pistol. It's got a way better trigger. It has better grip texture. It has better sights than what you would get from buying, a comparable Glock. And, there's been kind of shrinkflation happening on the Glock side too, because it used to be if you bought a Gen 5 MOS pistol, it came with 3 magazines and all the optics plates you could want. And that's not the case anymore. They come with 2 magazines now, and I think you get 1 plate maybe. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't bought one in a while, but it's not as generous as it used to be, but the price is still kind of the same. So it's just an incredibly competitive and a crowded field because a lot of people are making pistols now. And as the contract, so like there's 2 sides. There's the civilian sales side and then the contract side. And as the civilian market kind of marches forward with all these kind of whiz-bang features, the contract field kind of goes in that direction slowly, but it does go in that direction. And Glock on the whiz-bang feature side is not very competitive. So, I mean, the Koa was a big step forward because their optic mounting system with the MOS wasn't great. So they've got another option now that actually is a great duty option.
But even it's a proprietary mounting system, right?
Yeah.
Is that, I don't know, is that the best way forward to put another one of these proprietary mounting systems?
So's the Siglock, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
That's proprietary to basically P320s. There are agencies that, they've licensed that cut. Some agencies are cutting Glocks for the Siglock, but
it just feels like
it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the more some of these companies are moving towards proprietary optic mounting systems like that, I don't know. It would have been, feels like if they could have done something to make a mount that can accommodate all sorts of different optics that already exist on the market, that would be more competitive than just offering a better mounting system, but only one optic for it. You know what I mean? I'm sure. I'm sure that the optic companies will make versions for this Glock. I don't know. It feels like more the like problem at hand of just like, all right, we're going to catch up on this regard, but only in the, in the most proprietary way we can.
I would guess just looking at it, I don't know any of this to be true, but looking at the Koa, it was done the way it was done so that the optic could have more features. Because if the typical, acro rail was put on there, then you would have a higher deck height. And the way that this is designed with its kind of toe system, it sinks the window down, which is something a lot of people really like about, some of these things, is getting that window as close to the slide as possible. So it indexes more like irons. And that's probably the why they didn't adopt the acro. But yes, it's still a problem because it's another footprint we now have to deal with. So,
right. And
it requires the rear sight being behind the optic to retain the optic. So that's another kind of confounding factor on that particular design.
Yeah, I guess that's less a Glock complaint, maybe more of an industry complaint of like, stop doing these proprietary standards and maybe just try to move.
Well, why is it RMR too? Because the RMR screw pattern was developed for rifles, and there are very few handgun slides that are wide enough natively to accept the RMR screw pattern. Because like pretty much all of the guns have to have some kind of adapter plate that makes the back of the gun wider, and the Delta Point Pro and RMSC footprints make a lot more sense on pistols than the RMR footprint does.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, that's the last thing to touch on here is just maybe some, just a little more about the industry trends here of just, I don't know. One of the things that I've noticed, and I don't review guns. I don't come across nearly and put my hands on nearly as many new guns as you do. But a thing that I've really noticed over the last couple of years is that the industry has been releasing a lot of guns that really aren't ready for market, in my opinion. Like you see a lot of guns come out and they get a lot of hype, and I'll even fall for a lot of this hype, to be frank. And I'll get really excited about some new gun. And then, and maybe it even has good reviews, makes it through that early review stage without getting too many problems cropping up. And then once it gets out in wider release, you start to see some significant issues that are not uncommon. I've experienced this myself with the early P365s, which had light primer strike issues. The one that I bought, early on in that product's life cycle, and it had those issues, and that's a huge problem for a carry gun. But you see this repeatedly with stuff like the Daniel Defense H9, a lot of hype and then a lot of problems, and then it's just something that seems to reoccur a lot. Is that something you've noticed in the industry? What are your thoughts on this? It almost feels like the video game industry, where
but it's not software, it's hardware.
Yeah, it's worse because the gun, if your gun light primer strikes in a self-defense scenario, you might die. Whereas if you buy, Anthem from EA and it just doesn't work very well, you might be annoyed.
It'll get patched.
Yeah, but that's what it feels like. They did fix the 365 relatively quickly after that, but it's hard. I don't know. I look around at these new guns and some of them seem exciting to me, like the RXM or something, or some of these 2011s that you've reviewed. And it's like, I don't know if I can even recommend any of them to people to buy right off the bat, because it feels like you should wait a year before, or a while, until you see if anything crops up before, and wait for them to address it. I don't know. That's the impression that I'm getting from a lot of the industry right now. And I don't know how, somebody who does handle a lot of these new guns, what are your thoughts?
So it's difficult to say because doing the media side, sometimes there are, T&E guns or review samples that are sent out, and those are usually early production guns that are done in a small batch. So like the parts that are they're not cherry picked, but the parts that are put into those guns were produced not at scale. And then there's the first production run, which is where everybody's firing up the machines all at the same time. And then collectively, we get to understand where the wheels are going to fall off in the supply lines and the parts. Because, these firearm companies generally aren't making every single part that they're putting into the guns because, pins and springs usually come from one place. And if they're using metal injection molded parts, then that's a very specialized process. It doesn't necessarily make sense to keep that in-house. So they usually farm that out. And more often than not, there are hiccups. I would say more often than not, there are usually hiccups involved with shaking down the manufacturing operation when they go at scale. So I think it's very wise to kind of ride the pine for the first batch of guns to get into the wild and catch the second or third production run as that manufacturer is kind of shaking down its processes. And I think we probably all have a ton of experience with, some first gen product not living up to kind of the expectation. Right. But talking to some of these companies about kind of the why on why that happens, a lot of it does come down to the fact that, they build trust with early production, then maybe their parts supplier gets overstressed. I think the COVID in recent times did a number on the supply lines a lot. We used to have a super kind of decentralized thing. Then there was kind of a move to where a lot of the manufacturers wanted to control more of it. So started bringing it kind of in-house, but then they couldn't keep up with the volumes they were trying to sell at. So they send it out. Like there's a dozen different reasons why it can go wrong. But I think it's generally great advice to wait for the second or third batch of production so that they can, because they'll get the fix in. You've seen it on the SIG 365 is a good example. Yeah. The Daniel Defense H9 is another great example where, they put 1 million rounds through the gun in testing. They thought they did their homework, and then somebody tried a projectile that they didn't do any testing on, and it would keyhole. So, they've, to their credit, they've got a fix for it where if you got one of the early ones, they'll replace your barrel in your gun and update the trigger and backstrap for you if you send it into them. So, they're doing right by that, but that's not that uncommon, unfortunately. And it feels like, especially with new manufacturers, people who haven't done pistols before, trying to get into the pistol space are generally almost more prone to have those issues because they don't have the grooves worn through making the same product for years. So, yeah. I mean, realistically, invest in training if you want a new gun, and then figure out if the gun, is there once there are a lot of reports, not just the early review. I mean, as somebody who makes gun reviews, you really want to wait until there's kind of a preponderance of evidence out there that the things do what they say they're going to do. And the only way to do that is let other people go first, unfortunately. Yeah,
because even if you do like a 500 round burn down of a gun or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that the production, is the production models that when they're making 100,000 plus or whatever, that there won't be some issue that crops up among, even like a 5-10% failure rate, you still get 90% good guns, but that's pretty, that's a lot of bad guns that make it out there. So,
and I mean, the Springfield Armory Prodigy is a good example of that. Like, I've got 3 of them. I bought 2. They sent me 1. All of them work, but it's a Cerakote gun. So like the application of the Cerakote and how it's applied, like if you get a gun that has not as good a Cerakote job and it slows down the slide, you might get issues. I think they figured some of that out, but they also have guide rod issues where the spring's binding on the guide rod, and it just kind of depends which guide rod you got. And there's no accounting for that. Like, you can't test it until you actually put ammo through it, really, because maybe it did shoot 7 rounds at the factory just fine, because they are test firing them, but they're not. Right. You're lucky if you get a magazine.
Right. Yeah.
That's it.
It'd be hard for them to do.
Right. It'd be very expensive.
Firing for every gun, but
right.
And then even there, and then of course there's even just your expected wear-in period for a gun, where we're talking about metal on metal, machined parts here, especially at mass production scale. The tolerances are going to be. So I mean, I remember at a 365X or what is it, 320X5. And it took a little while for that to fully break in to where it would go into battery every time, because it just wasn't. It needed to work out some of the tolerances by just being shot enough to where it's a clean shooting gun. And so there's there's that, and then there's defects in design or defects in parts that make it out there. And I mean it's something I think that people have to understand. It's part of navigating, and maybe to reserve some enthusiasm for some of these brand new guns that come out. It's easy to get very hyped up.
Even if the product is proven, it doesn't necessarily mean yours is proven. If there's one piece of advice somebody walks away from this broadcast with, it's that you do have to test your gear. You can't just slap rounds in it and throw it in a holster and expect it to be good, because you could have bad heat treat on some of your internal parts and they could snap like that. Like, each part is hardened in the gun, and if they miss that mark, or you get a part that's out of tolerance, like, the only way to find that out is through using it, and don't put it into operation until you know that yours works. So please, please, please do that.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your perspective on this and letting us know what SHOT Show 2025 was like, and just discussing the industry a bit. Where can people find more from you if they want to do that?
So the best place to find me, where you can see my videos, is YouTube. YouTube.com/the Humble Marksman. Is my main page, but I'm on Instagram as the Humble Marksman. I'm actually also building an X presence. It's the Humble Marksman, but Marksman has no A's in it. So you can follow me there as well, because I think that probably X is the platform we should be concentrating our attention on here in the short term, because the censorship on the other big socials is it's a real thing. So.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much again for being here with us. I'm going to send it over to our member segment that we have this week, and take it from there. All right. It's time for one of my favorite segments that we do on the show, the member segment. And this week we have Elliot with us, who is a member from Illinois. Welcome to the show, Elliot. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us and let us get to know the community a little bit better of Reload members here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a little background on who you are, where you're from, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I live in Illinois, in the northern suburbs of Chicago. I'm originally from this area, but I was in the Army for 8 years. So traveled around a good bit and was stationed mostly in the South, Georgia, Tennessee, Arizona, Texas. So trips overseas, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Beautiful this time of year. Big beach.
I bet. Yes. And so tell us a little bit about your experience with firearms. Do you own guns? Did you grow up with guns? What did you get into them in the military? What's your sort of background there?
Yeah. I was exposed to guns a little bit growing up, but not really. I mean, my family didn't really own guns. I think there was it's like a Spanish Civil War era, or no, Spanish American War era rifle, like on the, wall of my grandparents' house, or, whatever. But that was kind of
That's cool.
Shot maybe a 22 at Boy Scout camp once or twice. Thought that was cool, but never owned a firearm. Didn't really know anybody who did. And then joined the military. That was kind of the introduction to firearms at large, at least kind of more modern firearms. And it wasn't until in 2011. 2012, 2013, I was on a deployment in Afghanistan, and my unit was doing like a large unit buy of Sig Sauer, either 5.16 or 7.16 rifles. And that was around the time of Sandy Hook. And so there were discussions from some of the people who were firearm owners that this might be your chance to get an assault weapon before they get all banned. So, I thought, okay, this is interesting. I do, shoot. I'm in the infantry, so it could be good professional development to just have something that I can shoot in my own time. Because kind of the notorious complaint in the infantry is that you don't shoot enough, even though theoretically that's your job. So decided to get a 7.16, the 308 caliber one, have something that could do a little bit longer range, and really didn't know what I was doing, but got it. And I remember asking at the gun store in Tennessee that it got sent to, okay, what do I have to do? Is this would be my trunk? Can I how do I take this to the range? Should I lock it up? And he's like, no, you're good. As long as you're not concealing it on your person or something. And it was kind of maybe FUD lore, not really clear, what even the rules were. But from there kind of got into shooting. And then when I was in Arizona, we had a really great range that was about 10 minutes away that had steel out to about 600 yards. So that was fun to kind of dip the toe into trying to hit something further away. And, then getting a scope, getting a bipod, then adding, okay, what about a pistol? I'm an officer. So maybe having a pistol would be also useful to practice on. And then just slowly kind of built up the collection from there. So
okay, so so you got into the military, it got you interested in guns, and then you started buying them for personal use, and started shooting more some distance, doing some handgun stuff. Got more interested in it as a sport hobby thing as well. And so how about today? You I guess you moved back to Illinois, right? From Tennessee, Arizona, obviously very different gun cultures there and culture. Yeah. So how is that going? What was that shift like for you?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was actually probably the first thing people brought up. I was actually in Texas when I got out of the military, and a lot of people brought up oh, you're going to move to Illinois. Can't you not have any guns there? Because they knew that I would go and shoot, and so that was a consideration. I had to leave at least a couple of things that I owned with my parents in Arizona, because they just were. I was moved to Chicago, and Chicago had very strict rules on what was allowed or not, and that was even before some of the Illinois assault weapons ban stuff came through a couple years ago. So it was kind of I think I could take a shotgun, and that was it. And then that basically just sat in a corner in my room, kind of locked up for a while. And only more recently, kind of in the pandemic, I kind of thought, well, what could I add that is legal to own where I lived? And so now I have a 1022 and a 5.7 Ruger, pistol, just something kind of fun to go shoot. It is, there is a personal protection, aspect of that, but it's always been kind of a secondary hobby now because it's just harder to get to a range. And it was, a little bit of a chore to shop around and find the models that I could actually own. The 1022 typically has a threaded barrel, and Chicago said that was, verboten. So finding the model that didn't have that part, became kind of a headache. You kind of had to shop around because at least prior to the Illinois assault weapons ban, everything is very segmented. So, if you're in Chicago, this is a rule, but if you were not in Chicago and in Cook County, that's a different rule. What's allowed, what's not. And then now I live in a suburb that also has like an assault weapons ban of their own. So even outside of the Illinois rules, there were considerations about what could I actually possess. And they have different magazine capacity and bans than Illinois at large. And I know it's kind of interesting to figure out the segmentations there and what you can actually legally own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this must have been a big shift in terms of trying to figure out what kind of guns you can even have, and navigating the local laws in addition to the state laws, because Illinois, I don't think they have a state preemption.
There's
law,
no preemption.
right?
Yeah, I'd love it if there was preemption, but there is not.
Right, and this is what gun rights advocates, this is their complaint, that if there's no preemption law, then you're going to have to navigate a sort of spider web of different local ordinances, and you might accidentally get caught in one that you didn't realize would apply to you. But beyond that side of the sort of legal aspect of what you can and can't own in Illinois compared to Texas or Arizona or Tennessee, obviously the culture must be a little bit different too, right? You're coming from a military background in a very pro-gun state like Texas was your last stop, moving to a place like Chicago, which is notoriously anti-gun, even though you can still own guns there, as you've outlined here. They're not the same guns necessarily, but you can still own firearms in Illinois and in Chicago. But I imagine the attitudes of people around you changed towards firearms as well.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I mean, I'm in Highland Park, and so obviously, famously, a shooting a couple of years ago, and so interacting with neighbors. When does that come up? A lot of them maybe assume that because they know my military background that I own a firearm. So I've had conversations with other parents in the neighborhood to make sure that they're comfortable, that they know that I'm safe with locking up firearms. They're not going to be available to kids. I have kids, so I don't want my 5-year-old to stumble across a loaded firearm that's in reach. Because she's curious, she's going to get into that. So. It's been interesting to navigate that side of it, trying to put neighbors at ease, but also maybe not being super public about it. It definitely, there's been some interesting conversations with those I'm a little closer to about, what is the Illinois law meant to do? Is it meant to make it harder for me to train, to go to a range? I think Highland Park has a pretty strict rule on whether even a range could be allowed to be created in the city, which there isn't. But, so if I have to drive 20, 30 minutes to go to a range, is it good for me to shoot more? Is the goal of some of these things to have equipped citizens who are actually competent versus not? But then also just kind of navigating. There's a lot of my neighbors were at the, Highland Park shooting. Luckily, my family was not. But, how do we talk about that, given that there's all this trauma that they've also gone through? I mean, I think the
subject to bring up for folks. It's something like that.
Kind of just recognizing the limits of I can have a earnest conversation with them, but they're probably not going to be moved from a larger policy standpoint because of their personal experience. Just oh, hey, I had to run away.
Right.
So that's it's kind of tricky to navigate. And then how open, I walk by signs on a random walk that say, ban assault weapons now and things like that, which is, I think, a little bit funny because Illinois has now done that, and Highland Park did that since 2013.
Right.
But there's still this larger sentiment of kind of anti-gun sort of attitude that's the issue. And so, should I put a sign in my yard that says the opposite? Should I hang a flag that says prepare to self-rescue or whatever? Things that seem to advertise a certain amount of maybe opposite opinion and is it worth having that conversation? Does that shut down conversation before it even happens? Is it better to just have those, individual moments to talk to neighbors when it does happen to come up? Either in a conversation about maybe the opportunity to go hunt or going and shooting with relatives in Wisconsin or whatever.
Mm-hmm. But I would also imagine that you're not the only one in your neighborhood or your community that owns guns or feels the way you do about them. So have you been able to find that sort of, common community with other gun owners in the area as well?
Unfortunately, not really. There's always kind of this thought of could you start a, club or organization that's, kind of in the vein of, the Liberal Gun Owners Association, or, those other clubs that kind of target a non-majority population of gun owners. Kind of in some ways, gun owners in this area are the minority. And so,
right.
I don't know, I've had thoughts about that, but it's never really been a thing. And just because of that, maybe hesitation to really fly the flag that like, oh, I own guns, maybe just for personal security and, sense, but also just a sense of propriety. It's hard to then find like, oh, hey, do you own a gun? Like,
right.
It just doesn't really come up typically. So unfortunately, haven't really found much of community here that would do that. The local range I go to is nice, but it doesn't feel like there's like a community aspect there as much.
Well, maybe there's some Reload members from the area too that you could connect with after this. I don't know. We'll see. But I know we've got a number of subscribers from Illinois and from near Chicago, so maybe perhaps you guys can connect. But and then so when it comes to gun news, what was it that got you interested in following gun politics, gun news? Was it when you moved to Illinois? You obviously mentioned Sandy Hook and the gun policy fight after that. What was something that brought it to your attention, owning certain kinds of guns, in 2012. And then you mentioned the pandemic as well, getting you, I guess, more interested in buying guns again. So was there anything in particular? Have you just been following, do you follow news a lot? Did you follow gun news in particular? Was there something that happened, maybe in one of those stories that brought you to following things more closely?
I don't know if there's anything in particular that brought it more to the forefront. I've always been pretty engaged. I was also half the way through my career in the Army, I switched to intelligence work. And so a lot of just like trying to keep up with foreign events, current events, domestic politics, reading lots of like kind of political digests, just in sort of the course of like keeping abreast with world affairs.
Sure.
And so, was aware of some of the discussions, obviously, as I became a firearm owner, like trying to understand what are the laws and what are things that might, potentially impact my ability to do something like, carry or, own a particular type of firearm. But then in Illinois specifically, definitely like the navigating the local laws. And also then as the like passage of the Protect Illinois Communities Act came about, then it was like finding those sources of news where people could really talk about it. And I could understand what were the different developments and, okay, what's happening now in litigation and those sorts of things. But then, regarding the reload, it was kind of being somewhat center right, but not necessarily Trumpy. The Dispatch was, I'd already listened to Jonah Goldberg when he was at National Review. And so jumped on the Dispatch pretty early. I don't know if I was an original subscriber like you, but followed them. And then I think I heard your interview with Steve Hayes on one of the Dispatch podcasts or something like that and said, I would love, real fact-based, gun information about just kind of like overall what's going on in the larger, domestic community. And so I think I signed on pretty early for the reload, but just appreciate the fact that like, it's not always this, maybe hyped up like, this is going to ban all firearms forever, or like this is going to make it so that all gun bans are unconstitutional forever sort of, news that you can get, especially in like places like YouTube. Having something that was like a little bit more, okay, we're going to like have somebody on from the Gun Violence Archive and like understand what their perspective is. And, even more recently, I think you guys talked to, or maybe you were featured on A Better Way 2A podcast and like discovering that from there and being like, okay, this is maybe a more interesting view on how I can engage with my own like neighbors, right, who might subscribe to more of the same political views as someone like, the people at A Better Way 2A.
Right.
So I appreciate that side of like, we're just going to kind of report on it as it is and hear both sides and be willing to like, not just have this like, little echo chamber of pro-gun news. Yeah.
That's definitely one of the intentions, right? Because there's some things gun media is good at, like gun reviews, as actually the podcast that this interview is going to go into shows, we've got Humble Marksman, who's a very good, high quality gun reviewer. But there's some things, mainly news and politics, that gun media has some failings in, just like major media has failings in talking about guns and gun policy. So does gun media, and in a lot of the ways you described of just like overhyping things, not understanding how DC really works. A lot of black helicopter type scare content. Look, and we're not. I just thought that we could fill a gap there where it's like we're going to try and take a more sober approach to this and focus on reporting out facts and doing more simple analysis over advocacy or opinion. And not that there's anything wrong with advocacy or opinion, but there's a lot of that already out there, and it's just not what I wanted to do with the reload. So I'm glad that's resonating, and that it's beneficial to the members like you, because we could not do this. The reload is not a very big publication. It doesn't have a lot of resources. All we have is because of members like you. Like that's I know it's a bit of cliche, I'm sure, from a lot of media outlets say stuff like that, but it's true. We don't have advertising dollars flowing in or anything like that. We're not backed by a billionaire like a lot of political media is run. A lot of partisan media is just paid for by some very wealthy donors. Not that there's makes their reporting inherently wrong or anything, but it is the reality. And so we try to do things a little bit differently. I appreciate that it gets noticed. Look, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing a little bit of your story with us and giving us some insight into who the people are that make up the Reload community. Perhaps some of our other Illinois subscribers, maybe you guys can get together and form a bit of a community out there. I think that would be wonderful as well. I guess we kind of did a dispatch in our back and forth here, but we have an ad swap going on with them, so I have to, I guess, fulfill that part. So I'll send it over to myself and tell you guys a little bit more about the dispatch. All right, folks, it's time to talk a little bit about the dispatch, doing an ad swap here between the Reload and the dispatch. And I think that's fitting because if you like what you're getting from the Reload in terms of high quality reporting that focuses on hard news, you'll probably like the dispatch as well, because get this, they also focus on high quality reporting and hard news. Now, they are a much broader publication than the Reload. We obviously focus on one specific area, whereas the Dispatch has a much larger team and is able to focus on a whole number of other issues, but still primarily in that national politics realm like we do here at the Reload. But they are one of my favorite publications. I am a paying member to the Dispatch, and so clearly, I highly recommend it. I've been a paying member since they were founded, and I've never had reason to rethink that even once. So they are constantly breaking news stories. They are sending you newsletters on whatever frequency you want. They have quite a variety of them over there. But I subscribe, for instance, to the Morning Dispatch, and I get, I think, a very nice summary of what's really going on from a pretty sober perspective. That newsletter is hard news and it's focused on it. And I think it's fantastic, but they also, of course, have some of the best commentators, in my personal opinion, over there as well. It was an outlet founded by Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg, two guys I've known for a long time. They've been on the Reloads podcast. Kevin Williamson as well has been on our podcast. So you've heard from these guys if you've been a Reload listener for a while here. And, I think you should check out the Dispatch if you haven't already. We have a free trial as well, 30-day free trial for Reload listeners if you want to go over and check out their paid offering, which I think is well worth the money. So I'd encourage you to do that. There's a link in the description of this podcast or on our website if you want to check it out. So head over to the Reload or to get that link, or head over to the Dispatch to see what they're all about.